Good morning. It's Friday at 9 o'clock, so it's time for Coffee with Karl. I'm Karl from TRIDEC, and this is our first time actually having a live in the Bechtel Boardroom audience. So I'd like to welcome all of our guests. We have a packed house down at the Bechtel Boardroom this morning for today's discussion. Appreciate everybody coming down. Thanks to our guests online. We are going to talk about the election results today. We've got a very distinguished panel here to discuss it in person and online. But first, we want to give thank you to our sponsor, Mike Miller at Wood Security. You just saw his commercial. Mike and his crew do a great job from downtown Pasco providing security for home, business, and commercial applications. If you have any questions about security, go talk to Mike downtown Pasco at Wood Security. So let me introduce our guests, then we'll do our little coffee cup talk. And then we'll get into the presentation. So I'm going to start far left. I guess you're on screen, probably your right. And Tim Peckinpaugh has been our lobbyist and legal counsel-ish, kind of, Tim, is that a good way to call it? For Tim's whole career, I think, which maybe spans back into the 90s. I'm going to make up some type of...
Actually, late 1980s.
Late 1980s. I was giving you a couple of years, just, benefit of the doubt. But Tim is a senior equity partner with K&L Gates, global law firm. And Tim's been a longtime partner, like I said, since the late 80s with TRIDEC. And so Tim's going to give us a breakdown this morning. Tim, thanks for joining us this morning.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. Just moving on down the line, Sean O'Brien is our own Executive Director of Energy Forward Alliance with a long and distinguished career working back in Washington, D.C. and has some insights into both state and federal election. Sean, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me, Karl.
Yeah, Sean, go Zags.
Go Zags.
There you go.
Most importantly.
Okay. And last but not least, our own David Reeploeg, our Vice President of Federal Programs and Executive Director of Hanford Communities. Also a former congressional staffer and, brought his expertise working with the congressional delegation to try to, and has been here now since 2017. 2017. Yes. So welcome, David.
Good morning. And maybe go Huskies.
Okay. We're all inclusive here at TRIDEC. So we'll kick it off with the coffee mug thing where we talk about the mug that we're drinking out of today. I just got this from my oldest son, Jay. He brought it back from Disneyland. It says DASA, like NASA, and it's Disney Aeronautics and Space Administration. Evidently, it's like a logo they came up with. I probably can't see it online, but it's kind of cool. It's a cool mug. When they launched Space Mountain in the 70s and Disney World and then Disneyland, and Space Mountain's pretty cool. So he brought this back from it. So that's my mug. David, I'll go next.
Yeah, sure. This is a mug I just got yesterday from Columbia Basin College. Just wanted to give them a shout out because they're putting together what's a really cool Hanford Nuclear Legacy lecture series. There's a series of several lectures at least, and they invited Karl and I to come and talk about what's happening at TRIDEC and economic development and diversification in the Tri-City area today. And they also invited Mike Schwenk, who is one of Karl's predecessors, to talk about the history of TRIDEC and its role in Hanford cleanup in the community. So that was a really cool lecture, and really appreciate their continued partnership in a lot of different things. So they got the CBC mug today.
Good job. Again, go Hawks.
Go Hawks too.
Sean, how about you? What do you got for us?
Today I have a CYM mug. Call your mom. My mother has never been accused of being subtle, and this was a gift from her.
That's surprising.
So, hi, Mom.
That's awesome.
And this is a mug for Beacon College in Florida. I was scurrying around for a new mug I've not used before for a coffee with Karl. And our youngest son went to Beacon College. Oh. It's a college that is focused on special needs, social learning disabilities. And for all parents out there, if you have a child who has special needs, think about Beacon College. My wife and I are huge fans of this college. Our son got 2 degrees from college. He has a learning disability. And this school has a great methodology. They don't force the kids to change. The professors learn how to teach those students who have learning disabilities. So it's really a school, a great institution, very, very helpful. And I would just encourage you folks to consider it if you have those kinds of issues in your own family. So this is a shameless commercial for Beacon College, and And not quite like CBC, but still a very, very special school for us.
Yeah. Oh, that's great, Tim. I appreciate that. I have two kids and they both have special needs. They're both on the autism spectrum. So that's really good advice and counsel. I appreciate it. Thank you. So Tim, take it away. I think you've got a few slides you want to share with this kind of an overview, and then we'll move on into some further discussion.
Yeah, happy to. Are we all set up here for slides? Great. So I usually have a much longer presentation when I come back and do my election recap. This is only about 10 slides and it's designed to do it quickly. And lots of time for questions and answers and a good conversation up here with our panelists. So as we all know, it was an election that was held and Trump, of course, won the election. It was actually a pretty good win for Trump and there's enough to call it a mandate for him. And importantly, he won the popular vote, which surprised me. This is a big deal for a Republican to win the popular vote by 2.5 million over Harris. And it's a decisive election, I think, because at the margins, Trump won all 7 swing states. All going in, we all knew there would be 7 swing states. This would be where they would focus the election. Every candidate spent their entire month or so last month in these 7 states. And Trump won all 7 states. So that tells me indeed there was a nice tide going for Trump for the election. This provides kind of a postmortem. Trump won because the most important issues were Trump's issues. They were inflation, immigration, and the economy. And those issues got the highest percentage of voters saying, yeah, that's what I care about. The other issues like healthcare, climate change, abortion were secondary issues. So those are Democratic issues. So that's why Trump won. He had the right issues for this particular cycle. You also see that he was winning demographic groups significantly. The racial groups, he was winning quite big, particularly with African Americans and Latinos, much higher increases, as well as the age groups. He won the youth vote significantly, by the way, huge bump among millennials and even Gen Zers. So that's impressive. And then we have more room. There'd be another category for income. And although Trump won the top 10%, no surprise there, he won the lowest 10% too. The lowest ladder he won significantly. So it was a broad win across all very demographic levels. So here's his agenda. Obviously focused on trying to reduce regulations, talk about tariffs, trade. Tariffs are a big issue for Trump right now. Focused on domestic energy production, oil and gas, but everything else as well, quite frankly. Focused on trying to preserve the tax cuts that were done in 2017, his tax cut bill, as well as to roll back unspent funds, the clawback funds not spent, particularly in the clean energy area, as well as withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord, and to deal with the immigration issue, particularly deportation. That's pretty much his agenda. And our team in DC couldn't resist themselves and created this slide trying to summarize the Trump tide, with T being taxes and tariffs, I being immigration, D being directives like executive orders to reduce regulations, and E being energy production and reduce environmental regulations. So this is the Trump tide. Kind of curious if the Trump team wants to brand this slide. They might like it actually. And you can see Trump's been very busy. He has tried to flood the zone with picks for cabinet positions. Actually, a very impressive start, and at least the speed of his start for developing a long list of people he'll look to carry out his agenda. Of course, the Attorney General candidate, Matt Gaetz, bailed out yesterday. Now, Boda, I think I can pronounce her name, is the new Attorney General candidate. And I did highlight Chris Wright, who's a DOE nominee. Interesting choice. He's an oil and gas guy, big fracker, but he's a deep thinker in energy policy in general. And we prepared a 10-page biographical profile on Chris Wright. In fact, I got the first copy of it that I prepared. If those are interested, just give me a card. I'm happy to send you a nice 10-page review about Chris Wright, who will be Secretary of Energy in all likelihood. Okay, so beyond Trump, the Congress is also Republican. So you have the trifecta, as we say in Washington, D.C. You have both houses of Congress, House and Senate, and you have the presidency now controlled by a single party. In the House, by the way, it's now currently 220 to 213 with 2 uncalled races in California. So that's a very, very slim majority for Speaker Johnson. It's the same he has right now. So really no change in the House. In the Senate, it's a net pickup of 4 seats. We're gonna have 53 Republican senators, so they have a pretty good working majority in the US Senate. And importantly, as we'll discuss during some of the Q&A, hopefully, the trifecta gives you a chance to do reconciliation, which is a vehicle to move big legislation with no filibuster requirements. Therefore, it is a significant way to make sweeping changes in Congress. And so Congress can do that because they have both houses and they have, of course, the guy who signed their bill when they're done. So that's why the trifecta is so important. Here in Washington State, real quickly to recap the results here. This shows you the results for the presidential race. Again, as we all know, there's a very strong divide. Blue on the west and red in the central and eastern part of the state. And just to give you some numbers here, you can see in Benton County that Trump got 59%, and Franklin he got 60%. And of course, no surprise here, in King County he got 22%. So that tells you right there why Harris won Washington State quite well, is because she's winning King County significantly. In fact, the margin in King County was 600,000 votes, and that was pretty much a statewide margin for Harris. So again, as we all know, King County drives this state politically. Senate race, of course, Maria Cantwell was in cycle. She was reelected handily. A little better margin than Harris had. And again, you can see the strong divide between the western part of the state where most population is and the eastern part of the state. Here in the 4th congressional district, Dan Newhouse was reelected with about 52%. Actually, that's a pretty good margin, 17,000 votes, unusual R versus R in the general against a MAGA Republican, Sessler. I will tell you that on election night, Dan's margin was less than 4,000 votes. And so I was a little scared about that because I was supporting Dan. And historically, the late votes that come in tend to be more conservative Republicans. During the primary, for example, Sessler kept gaining votes every time they dropped. But this time, when they dropped more ballots, Newhouse went up and finished 17,000 votes ahead. So that's good. That's a good sign for those of us who are supporting Dan Newhouse. And I think he will provide increased continuity and support and service for this congressional area. You can see the district there. He did lose Grant County. Otherwise, he was winning pretty much the entire congressional district. In terms of other congressional districts in the state, we have 2 new members. We have Mike Baumgardner in District 5, and Morris Rogers retired, of course. He got 61%. And in District 6, which is Derek Kilmer, he's retiring as well. And Emily Randall, more progressive Democrat, won that district. Otherwise, all the incumbents won in the congressional districts. In District 3 was an interesting race with Maria Lewins-Camp Perez. Supposed to be a very, very close race. She won 52-48, 16,000 vote margin against a MAGA Republican. So they're all back as incumbents. And so again, our marketing team couldn't resist this one here. This is Trump on a roller coaster. That kind of ride to happen in the next 4 years. So buckle up for an interesting time back in Washington, D.C. And here's our shameless plug for our election guide that I helped prepare for the firm. If you want to capture that, feel free to do so. And if you want to just give me your card, I can send you a copy of it. The guide is every day updated to reflect the results and how committees will be changed in Congress as well, both House and Senate. So that's my presentation. Happy to take questions and happy to have hopefully a good conversation about the results. I did not talk about so much the details of this area. That might be more appropriate for Q&A, but that's just because the conversation started.
That's great, Tim. As always, a great overview, and we'll have some good questions coming up. We're going to go to Sean next. Sean's put a few slides together on some of the more local elections, and then we'll get into the Q&A. And I apologize to David because David was supposed to introduce Tim. I kind of already screwed up. So
That's all right.
keep in mind what to talk to him about. Yeah, exactly. Throw him a couple softballs. So, okay. So take it away, Tim. This is Sean. Sorry.
All right, so diving in more of the state base here, and I'll run through these pretty quickly so that we can just get to the conversation. So obviously, as we all know, for the first time in 3 statewide elections, we had new candidates running. So Governor Inslee retiring after 12 years in office. So we had Bob Ferguson up against Dave Reichert. very similar to what we saw on the presidential side. You see that cascade curtain divide there between East and West. But again, not a close race here when it came to the statewide race. So when we talk about President Trump having a mandate at the federal level, I think Governor-elect Ferguson can certainly say that he's got a mandate when it comes to the state here. So diving in a little bit to Governor-elect Ferguson's preparations for stepping into office, he's put together a 53-member advisory council for his transition. And I just pulled a handful of names here that are familiar to those of us here locally and also from the business community. You know, we all know Nick Bumpus with UA 598 here, a great friend and ally of TRIDEC and the Greater Tri-Cities team. He's going to be a great asset for building a relationship with Governor-elect Ferguson. State Representative Tom Dent from the Moses Lake area, just north of us. Dave Maston, who's a former state legislator who, interestingly, wore both stripes. He was once a Democrat and once a Republican in the state legislature. He's now with the Association of Washington Business as the head of their government affairs. Again, a good friend and ally here who's on this team. And then lastly, Neil with Washington Roundtable, again, from the business community. I thought this was interestingly, I did a little bit of a tongue in cheek there with the join the team, but Governor-elect's office has put out an open call for applications on both staffing up his team and the various departments. Again, this is the first time in 12 years that we'll have new leadership in many of these places. So they have an open call for applications, but also, you know, I think very importantly for the civic process and for representation across the state, they also are taking applications for all the various commissions and boards that build up the state government as well. So we definitely encourage folks to check things out there. There's obviously the full gamut of opportunities when it comes to really building up these, you know, citizen-led commissions and boards. I'll just running through these. I don't need to go through each for you, but there were no surprises when it came to the other statewide races across the board. Interestingly, the one race that was a bit tighter and folks were watching was the Commissioner of Public Lands race. Former Congresswoman Jamie Herrera Butler from that 3rd congressional district down in Southwest Washington ran this year against King County Commissioner Dave Upthegrove. It was a bit of a tighter race, but again, I think those headwinds when it came to the national race and the other statewide races were just against former Representative Herrera Butler. So again, a lot of returnees in these seats, but no other real surprises when it came to these statewide races. On the state legislature piece, similar to the federal level with a trifecta, we will indeed continue to have a trifecta here in the state with state Democrats controlling both the House and the Senate. I wanted to point out the 14th legislative district specifically, because that's been of such interest and really kind of intrigue with many of you familiar with the redistricting effort that the courts ended up leading on crafting this very interestingly shaped district that you see, you know, goes from the Yakima area and the Yakima Nation down all the way to the border, but then curves all the way east and up into downtown Pasco. You know, this is the epitome of a gerrymandered district when you look at the definition of gerrymandering. And so the Democrats thought that they were going to be able to, with this new gerrymandered district, take a sweep here to flip these seats for the first time, but that did not happen. So incumbent Senator Curtis King, who had to move 1.5 miles down the street in order to run in the district because of the gerrymandering process, did pull out the win here against political newcomer Maria Beltran. So he will be returning to the state Senate. And then on the House races, former Grandview Mayor Gloria Mendoza really had a pretty decisive win for a House seat there. But the other House seat between Deb Majerez and Anna Ruiz Kennedy, who's from here in Pasco, was and continues to be still quite close. You know, when we talk about calling races, this is technically still outstanding a bit. It looks like Deb will pull it out here, but pretty tight there. But overall, I think Republicans feeling pretty emboldened that they were able to keep these seats after all of the political juggernaut dynamics of the redistricting and gerrymandering process here. And again, with the fact that this district does include part of Pasco here, we very much consider these folks a part of our representation in the state and work very closely with them. In fact, just the other day, we had Senator King here talking about the upcoming session with us. So very important there. Real quick, before I step to the Ledge Council piece, I should point out we had 4 statewide initiatives that were on the ballot, 3 of which failed, but one did pass, which was overturning the legislature's first steps to ban natural gas in new builds in houses across the state. Pretty interesting, many of us are familiar with the Let's Go Washington movement that led on these initiatives. Some of you may recall during the legislative session, they introduced these initiatives, a slate of 6 of them actually. And the legislature politically was forced to adopt 3 of the 6. And so when you actually tally up the full 7 initiatives that were led here, they had 3 passed in the legislature, 1 passed here. So 4 out of 7 is actually not a bad track record there. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see kind of the repercussions of this initiative movement. And, they had tried to do so in a previous cycle, the Let's Go Washington team, where I forget if it was 10 or 12 initiatives they brought forward. And they very quickly realized they had to build up a lot of infrastructure. None of those proceeded. So to go from that to now passing 4 of the 7, I certainly think that they will see momentum on their side to where they'll continue to take a stab at leading initiatives here on other areas where they think they have some political capital, like this natural gas ban that clearly the population just did not support that concept there. So regarding the Legislative Council, TRIDEC is one of 6 organizations in the business community here in Tri-Cities that come together and put together the list of priorities for the legislative session at the state each year. We are actively going through that process right now. I am a co-chair of the Legislative Council, actually on behalf of the Regional Chamber, along with Zach Ratkai from the Benton Franklin Council of Governments. So what we've been doing the last few months is taking input from community organizations, businesses, the municipalities, school districts, et cetera, on what they're trying to tackle this upcoming legislative session. What are their priorities? What are provisions, bills that they're trying to get across the finish line? Last year, we had 6 provisions that the Ledge Council really championed forward, and 4 of the 6 did proceed across the finish line. So we were really excited about that. So the QR code there actually leads you to our registration for the Tri-Cities Day in Olympia. So January 23rd, we'll have hopefully a large delegation from the community all making our way to Olympia to meet with legislators to talk about those priorities and the other general topics that we're wanting to check in on amidst the legislative session. So would really encourage everyone in attendance, everyone watching, to join us. It would be great, I always have a little bit of a chip on my shoulder. I'd love us to outshow Spokane when it comes to our presence in Olympia. I think we can. I think we should. I think we've got a really engaged community. So would love to see all of you join us in Olympia for that. So I think we'll call it there.
Thanks, Sean. Yeah. I'm going to ask David if he has any questions, since I kind of stole his thunder before.
So it's sort of been in reverse order. No, and what I was going to do, and just real quickly to sort of set the stage about why these elections, especially on the federal side with TRIDEC's long history of federal engagement and advocacy, are so important to us. Obviously, the community here has 2 very large Department of Energy missions, the Hanford site, Hanford Cleanup, as well as Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. This year, the operating budget right now for Hanford is about $3 billion. For PNL, it's between 1.6 and 1.7 billion dollars. Hanford employs about 12,000 people here, and PNL roughly 6,000. So that's a combined total of nearly $5 billion and nearly 20,000 jobs that are really dependent on that federal funding and the work that we do to and we do a lot of work to support the funding that those both DOE programs need, but obviously we get tremendous support from our congressional delegations, from Senator Murray, Senator Cantwell, Congressman Newhouse. Historically, we've done a lot of support too from Kathy McMorris Rogers and Derek Kilmer and others. And so with that in mind, and I guess that this is transition to a question, starting with you, Tim, on the federal side. Do you have a sense yet of where Michael Baumgartner is going to be kind of looking at the committee assignments or things like that that could be maybe beneficial to us? And maybe the other thing I'd add is that with the last redistricting, the 5th congressional district that Michael Baumgartner is now going to be representing is very close here to the Tri-City area now. And so just north of Pasco essentially is the 5th congressional district. And so both state legislatively and congressionally, it's really nice that we have so many congressional districts and legislative districts that care about the Tri-Cities. That just means that there's more voices in either DC or Olympia that are responsive to the community and our priorities.
Yeah, great question. First of all, a bit more context on the appropriations process. $5 billion is a big hunk of change that comes to this area. And one appropriation bill doesn't. The Energy and Water Appropriations Bill provides that most of that $5 billion. That's a $50 billion bill. So 10% of one bill is coming to this congressional district. That explains why when Patty Murray was chairing that committee and why Dan Newhouse was a member of the committee, why we're so focused on the appropriations process and not one particular subcommittee. So just to give you some context about why his comments are so important. Mike Baumgartner, new member, he's learning his way, obviously. I've talked to him. He's not familiar with the Tri-Cities, quite frankly. So it requires some education to kind of focus about P&L and the Hanford site, because many of his constituents in Franklin County probably work at the site. And so that'll be one of our objectives, is to have the education process for him. We have a great head start. It was just announced 2 days ago that his chief of staff, Jenny Gorski, who you well know, was chief of staff for Doc Hastings, which is a huge bonus for us. I mean, first of all, when I met with Mike, I encouraged him, make sure your chief of staff and your top staff entourage know how Washington, D.C. works. A lot of folks come in, they hire the campaign manager as a chief of staff, and that might be a good play for the local constituency, but in terms of knowing how Congress operates, it often does not work. Jenny knows how Washington, D.C. operates. She's a seasoned professional staffer, and as a bonus, she knows about Eastern Washington, having worked here for Doc Hastings. So that's a great head start for us, and it's now upon us to kind of start the education process and make sure that the advantage that Jenny provides, we can amplify and ensure that Mike understands why the Tri-Cities is so important to his congressional district. Committee assignments, don't know yet. I don't think he knows yet either. Energy and Commerce obviously would be a good choice for him, but as a freshman, hard to get that committee, obviously. I guess he'll probably get natural resources. He might try for armed services, given Fairchild Air Force Base. But the reality is that freshman members' assignments often are just a placeholder. It's their second, third term where they actually get the assignments that may have long-term enduring value in the service of Congress.
I saw, very promising for him. He was elected by his freshman class as the policy committee representative the other day as well. So great opportunities for leadership to step up there.
To me also, you mentioned the appropriations and the Energy and Water Appropriations Bill, which is super important for us. And one of the great things about keeping Congressman Newhouse is that he's becoming increasingly senior on the Energy and Water Appropriations Subcommittee. Obviously, the Republican Party is going to remain in the majority in the House, but in the Senate, Senator Murray has been a huge champion and really a big part of the reason why we've been as successful as we have in the last couple decades, really. She's currently the chair of the Full Appropriations Committee. With the change in majority, she'll move to ranking member. Do you have a sense of kind of what that means? And conversely, also with Senator Cantwell moving from chair to ranking member of the Commerce Committee?
Well, there's no question that Patty's influence and Maria's influence is somewhat diminished. They'll be in the minority. They're still very relevant, though, because they are ranking members on two very important committees. Appropriations, by far the biggest committee for us. Also Commerce Committee, which has a lot of jurisdiction we care about too, is where Maria is. The Senate is more collegial, more bipartisan than the House. I think they still have a very important role to play. The appropriations process in general is much more work as a team, and I think the ranking member there has more influence than you would have in the House, for example. So I think that Patty is well positioned to still be very, very influential. Susan Collins will now chair appropriations. Collins and Murray get along very well. They were a great bipartisan team this past couple of years. I think that Murray was a leader in that process, quite frankly. So I'm sure she'll get some recognition of Collins as say, you're a good partner to me, I'll be a good partner to you, and work in the appropriations process. So I expect that she'll still have been very, very influential in working the process. This may seem kind of odd, but to some extent, she can be more parochial. Murray can be, as she's no longer chair. They have to worry about the sort of big picture. She can get more in the weeds about supporting priorities for our region. So that's actually might be a small plus for us at the margins. But still, not having the gavel, not being the majority, it will diminish her influence overall. But I still think she'll be a significant player. And just to underscore, having her as the chair of Energy and Water Appropriations this past couple of years was hugely helpful. Don't know if that will continue. That's probably a wild card. John Kennedy from Louisiana will likely become the chair of Energy and Water Appropriations. And he's not really expressed much interest on our issues thus far. Hopefully that'll change as he now takes chairmanship and will be put more focus on the nuclear issues and the EN issues. Right now he's more of an oil and gas guy, to an imagine being from Louisiana.
I have written down some questions. Maybe we'll run through a couple of those, have a little back and forth, and then we'll open up for questions from the audience. Be thinking if you have a question that we could throw out there. And to anybody watching this online or through the webinar, you can put your questions in the comments section on Zoom or in the comments section on Facebook as well, and we'll do our best to get to them. So Tim, you talked about the trifecta. Now the Republicans have a majority in both houses and then obviously the presidency, but I think that's the same thing the last time President Trump was in office, right? So, you know, in 2017, is there a different approach, like say to the House? It seems like back then that maybe Republicans weren't as potentially united as maybe they are today. And then even you just talked about the collegiality of the Senate and the way that it is bipartisan, yet that seems to be one of President Trump's kind of campaign focuses is, you know, drain the swamp and these phrases that we hear. So like, what's your prediction on like having majorities in both houses and the presidency being able to pass legislation more effective, less effective, about the same as it was last time? Like, what do you think?
The trifecta is really helpful for passing big bills like reconciliation. And this is in the weeds, I know, but reconciliation is a congressional process that allows you at least once or twice a year to pass sweeping change. The 2017 tax bill, the Trump tax cuts, was passed on the reconciliation.
Okay.
That had, again, the trifecta. The IRA that was passed by the Biden team, again, comprehensive bill, was passed because of reconciliation. In fact, if you look at the past 10, 15 years, all the major bills that passed the Congress into the reconciliation bill. So that's the vehicle for doing it. And it may seem, well, why is that important? Well, one reason is because in the Senate, we have a filibuster rule. You have to have 60 votes to pass stuff in the Senate usually. Reconciliation is the one exception. And so just a bare majority is sufficient. So that's why having both houses and the presidency gives you this rare chance to pass a sweeping bill. And there'll be it's going to happen Q1, Q2 of next year, comprehensive bill. It will likely be tax focused. They're going to renew the Trump tax cuts and do other changes too. Reconciliation rules are budget focused. As long as your issue affects the deficit, revenue or a tariff or appropriations, or has some revenue or spending impact, that qualifies for reconciliation. And the parliamentarian makes a choice. Immigration is a tough call, but everything else pretty much can get into a reconciliation bill. Healthcare is reconciliation. So the point is that this is a chance to do stuff. And that's why Republicans right now are developing their plan. They're very serious about it because they have, again, the runway laid out there for them to go ahead and pass a comprehensive piece of legislation that can really have consequential changes. So that's the process they're going to follow. Collegiality, bipartisanship, those are nice terms, but the reality is reconciliation bill is a partisan bill, and it's going to pass based upon the Republicans hanging together as a team, probably had very few Democratic votes. I mean, the IRA bill, for example, had no Republican votes for it. Democrats raced it through because they had the votes. But it mostly works. And so, in a sense, the trifecta amplifies maybe a mandate, if you will, and allows you to pass these once in a generation sweeping bills.
We had a question from online and I wrote one down as well. And so with the Trump administration, will there be changes in federal policy around climate change, decarbonization? Obviously, you talked about Inflation Reduction Act, which actually had a lot of spending for kind of clean energy projects. The question was, how might that affect programs that P&L does around decarbonization, different, Office of Science research they do specifically, and then maybe throw Sean and David in as well on, because we've talked about it in, the state of Washington almost like doubled down on the Climate Commitment Act, which is one of the initiatives that Sean talked about that failed. So it's like Washington might be moving to more even, more clean energy, more decarbonization, where Washington DC might be moving away from it. What's your take on it? What do you think?
Yeah, good observation. First of all, the Trump obviously is not going to be a climate change fan. Okay, that's going to be a significant change from what we had with the Biden administration. In fact, I can't really find an issue. It's probably got more of a significant change, a delta, if you will, than climate. Now, will that be significant? I just don't know yet. You have to undo the IRA. It's very, very tough. You can claw back money. You can reduce the tax incentives. For individual appropriation accounts, though, at P&L, may not make much of a difference because that may take a while for those issues to be made, quite frankly. And as I've been telling clients, it's how you talk about this issue. I mean, don't say decarbonization. Don't say climate change. Talk about energy efficiency, performance of energy, doing more of what you have. Let the marketplace decide how you go on these kinds of issues.
Yeah.
In the case of Washington State, have the states driving, and that'll be the big change. I mean, it's interesting how the country went red, but Washington State went blue.
Yeah.
Which is no surprise, I guess, in some respects. But the reality is that climate will be driven now by states, and so it'll be state standards, state incentives, state-driven changes, and that's relevant, and that should still play out. So you shouldn't give up on the clean energy agenda, but look to states perhaps as more of a driver than at the federal level. Frankly, it's just the way it's going to be with this new administration, which is not going to be a priority for the president. I mean, he'll pull out from the Paris Accords on day one. They will change the whole narrative on climate change. It's not going to be based upon trying to reduce CO2 emissions. Yeah. It's going to be much more fossil energy driven. Having said that, there's still very much a significant place for those doing clean energy technology programs. They just have to kind of change their narrative and look more to the states as the driver.
Yeah. Sean, from a Washington perspective, you spent time in Olympia through a EMA, but working specifically for Energy Northwest on a proviso for Energy Northwest that was funded through Climate Commitment Act, carbon credit sales. So you have a take on this topic?
Yeah, both at the federal and state level. Yeah. So I just got back last night from hydrogen conference, taking a look at, we have the Pacific Northwest Hydrogen Hub that is a huge recipient, $1 billion of federal dollars from these programs that Tim just talked about. Interestingly, while we were at this conference, 2 of the other hubs just announced they signed their paperwork. Those were in the Midwest and in Texas. Interesting, when you look at the political map, are the senators and representatives from those regions going to want to claw that funding back from their states when we move forward here, right? So to Tim's point, I think it's going to be an interesting kind of roadmap here as you see these folks, in these regions kind of chiming in saying, no, this is good for jobs and economic development and growth in our areas, even if it is in the clean energy space, and under this greater decarbonization umbrella. At the state level, I think what's been interesting about our community and the opportunities with this Climate Commitment Act conversation is, regardless of the politics, we know that we are the center of energy for the Pacific Northwest. And for the actual projects that are moving the needle on decarbonization and getting new electrons on the grid for producing new energy for the region. And so, when we had legislators touring the state, looking at where Climate Commitment Act dollars have been spent and could be spent if the program did indeed survive as it did, we have a great story to be telling between Energy Northwest and the lab and WSU and all the work there. It's happening right here in our backyard. And so I think, to the point you and I have talked a lot about, to the point Tim just made, a lot of that focus is going to be on the state level now, where we continue to embrace these opportunities, regardless of the politics. We know it's good for our community to be bringing more jobs and continuing to provide that energy leadership for the Northwest.
One thing I'd add, excuse me, one thing I'd add to the point that you made, Tim, about sometimes it's not that you do anything significantly different, but you kind of just reframe what you're doing. But one of the things that and to some degree, I think that's something we'll see here with a variety of different projects. But one of the things that I've seen over the years too with PNL is that they do have such a diverse suite of capabilities that they are able to adjust and find ways to continue to serve whatever the next important national mission and priority is. And so that's something that I'm confident that they'll be able to adjust based on where the administration or Congress wants to move forward to in the future. But good question to both of you guys. You both obviously know our regional issues very well, whether it's Hanford cleanup, the National Laboratory, broad energy issues, agriculture, the Snake River dams, and others. So do you have a sense of, with this new federal administration, with the Trump administration, what and the current makeup or the new makeup of Congress, what that will kind of mean to our region on some of those issues? And likewise, Sean, for you, with a new governor and new state administration, how that might change some of the approaches that the state is taking on our issues.
Okay, very good question. With respect to Hanford cleanup, every time we have a change in administration, change in power, we have to go to an education campaign. Chris Wright from DOE, New Deal Secretary of Energy. He'll be surprised when he finds out that most of the budget he'll have control over is not energy. It's nuclear weapons and it's EM, it's cleanup. So there'll be a huge education effort to get him and his staff understanding. Oh, by the way, there's Hanford. It's a big chunk of your budget, and talk about the Hanford story with him. So that's what we do back in DC, is we have to work with our congressionals and just advocacy and educate the incoming team as to don't forget about Hanford. The cleanup mission is important. We have a responsibility, just our usual talking points, but we'll have to place defense. We have to do some education on the front end to preserve our priorities with respect to Hanford cleanup. There was always an initial suspicion. Well, it's a lot of money you're spending out there. What are you guys actually doing? So we have to kind of retell our story, double down with our narrative to make sure that we protect the funding for Hanford. Having Patty Murray and Dan Newhouse and Maria Cantwell will be very helpful as part of our effort to maintain that, but still we have to be very effective in trying to get our story out about Hanford. The laboratory, I agree with David. The laboratory is very adept because they have such a broad diversity and portfolio of stuff they do. Good R&D. Very good at that already, but just have them focus on where they have strengths and how they can be a very effective partner. The incoming Republican administration is all about innovation. I mean, they're fine spending money on doing basic R&D as long as you have an innovation theme behind it. And so I think they'll be fine in that context. Agriculture, mission agriculture, hard to say yet exactly where that's going to be heading, quite frankly. We'll see where they go with the USDA with their pick for secretary of that department. And I think that
and what's USDA?
I'm sorry, U.S. Farm Agriculture.
Oh, USDA. Okay.
USDA. So in any event, agriculture, I think is ag processing. I think a big part of that's going to be the export market and tariffs, and that's a double-edged sword for our farmers, quite frankly. So we have to kind of focus on trying to be very more precise about that. The farm bill is in disarray right now, so that's going to be next year's project at this point, probably. So that's a TBD, I think, agriculture. The dams. So the good news here is that Trump is fine on dams. They will support the dams. It'll be a complete sea change from where Biden has been on the dam issue. The state with the governor and the new folks coming in will not be our friends on trying to support the dams, but we're now going to have a chance to have at the executive branch level, I think, a much different perspective on the dams, which they'll see as critical infrastructure, and tearing them out makes no sense. we have to make that point to them. We're gonna have to use our congressionals to explain to them the dams and their importance and why it would be silly to tear them out prematurely. So in any event, that issue is before us. We have to work our congressionals because we've lost Kathy. Baumgartner's gonna be great, but he has to develop some seniority and know-how. And we're just gonna have to make sure we get our story told on the dam issue. So I think that, it's overall a pretty good news story, but we have to just make sure we do our part of the assignment, which is to ensure we tell our story.
Yeah, and I think the same goes at the state level is, working to help educate the new governor-elect about just all the great things that we have going on in our backyard. And, I think his relationship with our friends in labor, as mentioned, we can't really underscore more how valuable it is to have labor and business together here on behalf of Tri-Cities, working with one another. And so I think where sometimes we may have seen an ideological approach under Governor Inslee on some of these things, perhaps there's a bit more of a pragmatism, opportunity for pragmatism at least, when it comes to that relationship, because we've got such great partners in Nick Bumpus and others who are helping demonstrate, the critical importance of these. These clean energy efforts are great for the environment. They're also great for jobs. So I think, again, to be determined on a lot of these things, but hopefully a lot of opportunity.
We'll go back quickly and then we'll put it up for questions. But Tim, you talked about the approach maybe from the federal government, giving states more local control on certain issues, and obviously overturning Roe v. Wade by the Supreme Court did that for a woman's right to choose. And so do you see that as an ongoing theme that we might see coming up with the new Trump administration, in that there might not be this top-down approach that or will it be issue by issue, or do you have a direction you think that they'll take? I mean, it's, this goes back to the Civil War, right? Like,
Right.
This issue of states' rights versus federal rights and who's going to win. We fought a war that was very bloody, and we're not going to do that again. But what do you think?
Or the Republican philosophy has been pretty consistent, which is that states ought to have more authority to make decisions about these matters. And that's where Trump did a pivot on the abortion issue.
Yeah,
which I think worked for him politically pretty well. So yeah, in general, I think the Republicans and sort of the Federalist argument will carry the day, is that when you have an issue, the state should do it when they can.
right.
We have interstate commerce, and you have the need to have a combined union that, using your Civil War metaphor, you need to have a federal government. And you have some federal leadership.
Yeah.
But I think there's going to be a preference for state rights. So that's right. That's just the Republican view. I don't think it'll change at all. And I think Trump is fine with understanding that the states have a very important role. Having said that, Trump is Trump, and he is going to want to exercise leadership and very, very decisive and still execute a lot of policy at his level. And the reality of history is, from the Revolutionary War to Civil War now to today, it's a different country, it's a different society, it's faster, it's communications, it's global, and foreign policy will still be very much a federal function, and will be executive agency action will be taken. So that area will certainly be very much hugely focused on Washington, D.C. and not so much states, but other issues for sure, I think will be a strong preference to start with the state decision making.
Anything else?
I think I'm very curious on the immigration side of things, and when it comes to, there's been some major promises on when we're talking about things like deportations, and you're already seeing certain states and municipalities kind of chiming up to puff their chest to say we're going to stand up against Trump on that. So I think that's going to be very fascinating to watch. I think on Tim's point as well, on the states piece, a lot of talk on the Department of Education. It's always been a talking point for Republicans that they're going to abolish the Department of Education because DOE doesn't actually teach anyone anything. It's the local schools that do so, right? So curious to see what kind of traction actually takes place there.
Maybe one thing I would add too on the energy side, a big priority for us has always been nuclear energy. And so one of the things that, from what I could tell, reading through the tea leaves and some of the information, Tim, that you've sent over with the new administration, with the Trump administration, and with the likely Secretary of Energy, who is on the board of a nuclear technology development, nuclear reactor company, that we should, I suspect, see still sustained federal support for nuclear energy, whether it's framed as a clean, carbon-free energy resources, or is just recognition that we do need a lot more energy in our country, and it's base load power, abundant power that could be available with advanced nuclear. I think we'll still see that continued support for nuclear energy, which is pretty exciting for us.
Absolutely.
Well, I could sit here and ask questions all day, but we haven't given our audience that's gathered here, packed house in the Bechtel boardroom this morning. Does anybody have a question for me?
Actually good timing, David. I was curious, so with like you guys talked about the IRA and kind of clawing back, money for the clean energy space, but more specifically for advanced nuclear, like there's other, outside of the IRA, the Advanced Act, there's a lot of money that's been put forth for HALEU, for enrichment, for deconversion, even for advanced reactor demonstration. Is there any risk, do you think, that some of that money could get clawed back, even though they might support nuclear? Some of this is kind of newer and a lot of money hasn't been spent yet. Is there any risk similar to IRA that they might try to claw any of that back?
Do you want to take a crack at it first, Tim?
Yeah, I can. Certainly, any IRA money that has not been obligated or spent yet is going to be susceptible to a clawback. Trump has said that, and that's part of their pay for their tax bill, is to claw back this money. Having said that, to go to David's point, this incoming administration is fine on nuclear. They're going to be good on nuclear. The narrative needs to change somewhat. It's not climate. It's going to be reliability, base load, abundant energy. And I think nuclear fits those through all three beautifully. Plus, there's geopolitical issues with nuclear that I think Trump is very focused on. And on the issue with respect to fuel, HALEU, the Trump team is very focused on domestic supply chain. So if we define the issue as we can't have the Russians give us HALEU, we have to have our own reliable supply chain for nuclear fuel, I think that's fine. So I think we're going to be good on nuclear with this incoming administration. If you have some funding in IRA that's not yet been obligated, I would suggest you get it obligated fast for January 20th, because it'll be there for clawing back. We still start there. They may decide to pick and choose and play favorites, but I suspect that you're much better served if anybody has any money out there in the IRA space that they want to make sure it gets fully paid to you or to your company. Get it done by January 20th.
Anything else from? Yeah.
So with the slim margins that we have in both the House and the Senate and DC, I've seen it in the past, and Tony kind of alluded to it, but without saying it, but factions. I mean, it's only a few votes to swing something one way or the other. Are there major factions? I shouldn't say major. Are there those factions still exist? What areas do you think that you can see the most influence those factions taking? Are there key points in DC that it won't be really easy to push through?
You mean factions? You mean
ideological factions? A dozen Republicans don't like this, and a dozen Republicans can control things.
Well, yeah, they can. And that was more evident, I think, this past cycle, because complication with Speaker McCarthy, and it was a feud, and it was a lot of personalities that drove part of that, quite frankly. Plus, they were in the minority and were going against the administration, and they felt they could be more effective in trying to build leverage by having a small faction, if you will, try to drive the agenda. It's now different. Now they have their guy in the White House, if you will, and they would see, and I'm sure this would be Speaker Johnson's message to them, our margins are slim, got to hold together as a team. We're going to have no Democratic votes probably for our priorities. So we have to rely upon our team to vote as a group, because when we produce a bill, it'll be signed. This is serious now. It's not a question of playing games and who gets on Fox News. This is actually producing an enduring result for our objective. So I think that'll be a very powerful message. It'll minimize some of the fractions, the various factions that may be out there that could go forward. Having said that, there's no question the margins are very close. And there's no question that a few votes can be very influential. We saw with Matt Gaetz. I mean, he came down pretty fast because 5 senators told Trump, Republicans, that I ain't gonna support it. So that was enough to stop Gaetz. But I think in general, while it's always gonna be present, I think that at least initially you're gonna see the Republican team try very hard to hang together because they realize that this is a significant chance to actually provide some governing and some leadership for their agenda. If they fail, which they sometimes do, and sometimes best laid plans fail, they would perhaps see some serious consequences in the midterm elections. That'll be part of the issue is how long can this go? The governing view in DC is this is a 2-year deal. They got 2 years to show they can lead. If they can't, then it's going to be probably very difficult in terms of the Republicans maintaining their objectives and their agenda and even their majorities in a couple of years. So I wish I had a better answer for you, but in today's politics, close margins obviously lead to the chance for a few to be very, very influential. I think that was true 2 years ago. This time, not quite as much as the Republicans will simply understand the gravity of what they had before them, how they can actually provide some serious results and hold together.
I think Trump winning the second time does, again, back to that mandated piece, I think there's going to be a bit more unity in Congress than maybe the first time around under Republicans. You see Matt Gaetz is no longer in the House, so there's one loud voice. But interestingly, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is a big thorn in the side of Speaker Johnson, they just had a kumbaya moment where she's been given a subcommittee chairmanship for this new DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. So they've created a new subcommittee that she gets to chair. In exchange, she is committed to voting for Speaker Johnson for Speaker. So I think you're going to see a lot of this, at least in the beginning, this push on the unity front, even from some of the characters.
We have a question from Zoom talking about on a local level. We saw Richland's school levy fail in Franklin County. There was a EMS and a levy lid lift fail, some local issues. And John, you talked about the Tri-Cities Legislative Council that we work on with Visit Tri-Cities Regional Chamber, Pasco Chamber, West Richland Chamber, Hispanic Chamber, coming together to speak with one voice and prioritize our legislative issues. The question is, and I think it's a fair one, should TRIDEC and our other, maybe our partners in the Ledge Council take a look at weighing in on some of these local issues? And I think we're seeing it across the board on school districts, what we read about. And I'm not sure if it's kind of fallout from McCleary, kind of like a McCleary hangover, or like, how do we fund schools? How do we build new schools? We got some construction companies here like to see the school construction, as do we. What do you think? I'd go to Sean first and David. I mean, just an opinion, and I think it's a fair question.
I'd probably just turn it back to you, Karl, because you've been leading alongside with David, outreach efforts to our municipalities and counties with this very concept of speaking with one voice to better strengthen the fact that we are the 3rd largest metro in the state, and we've got to have cohesion and unity here as a community if we're ever going to move the needle in our advocacy at the state level as well. So if folks are kind of questioning our own ability in our own backyard to get the house in order, they may not take us seriously elsewhere. So yeah. I think the effort that you two have really been spearheading to push that approach is really needed.
I think, and just to echo what you said, Sean, I think that's really the opportunity for us as a community to the extent that we possibly can. And I think that goes back to one of the things we talked about yesterday at Columbia Basin College, is that, with the nature of TRIDEC and our board, with elected officials from all 9 of the local governments, all the largest employers, small businesses, higher education, and others all being on our board, it is a really good forum to be able to bring the community together and to be able to speak with one voice. But to the extent that we can expand that on some regional issues and regional priorities, and really start flexing our muscle as that community of 320,000 plus people, the 3rd largest metro area in the state. I think that can, and one of the things we've heard through the Ledge Council is that there are some real kind of challenging state policies associated, especially with K-12 education and some of the challenges that we've seen the Richland School District have recently. So we might be able to work collectively through the Ledge Council and through all of the school districts and other mechanisms to try to address those kind of challenges that really do have some impacts on our community.
It's a good question. I think it's one that we can't bring back to the Ledge Council and back to the TRIDEC board and, get some more input on the direction that we go, because there's obviously a question around, who are winning elections, who are driving these boards, that is a factor in some of the decision-making process, but we appreciate the question. We got a minute, so lightning round. I'm gonna go to David first. Closing comments?
It's gonna be an interesting next 6 to 12 months. But I just think like Tim said, it's our responsibility collectively here at TRIDEC and with the Ledge Council to introduce the Tri-Cities and our priorities to all the new folks, whether it's the new Trump administration and the political appointees that'll be overseeing some of the work at Hanford or at the National Laboratory, with Congressman-elect Baumgartner, with Governor-elect Ferguson and others. And so it is going to be an interesting and exciting next few months, but we have a really good team, not only here at TRIDEC, but throughout the community and all of our partners to carry that out.
John?
I'd just say, join us in Olympia, January 23rd for our Olympia Day. It would be great to have, like I said, a strong showing out there.
And beat Spokane, right?
And let's beat Spokane.
There you go. Tim?
Yeah, my closing comment would be, going off something Dave said earlier about the need for unity and having a single voice. At the federal level, TRIDEC has always hit above its weight class because of that very reason, because we unite around our priorities, our themes, and advocate effectively as a single voice. And that's a very effective tool in Washington, D.C. It's the way to get people like Mike Baumgartner to understand our agenda and work and want to help us going forward. So the community has always been very good. All of you folks who are here today and those listening right now and watching us virtually, it's important to keep us focused on our objectives and unify around what our priorities are and then communicate them. And that's always made this a very, very effective result for us and why we've done so well. So just keep it up.
Thanks, Tim. And I'm going to close out with a couple of thanks. First and foremost, Tracy Jow created Coffee with Karl. It was her idea to have this virtual format, so everybody's here in the Bechtel boardroom, give some feedback, tell us what you think. But Tracy does a great job for the whole TRIDEC team. Her partner, Tiffany Burke, our operations manager, you guys are a critical part of our team. We are a team. We couldn't do it without you. Our board of directors and funders, we couldn't do this without the investment that the community makes in TRIDEC. And I would say all of our predecessors at TRIDEC. I mean, Tim, when you talk about swinging above our weight and our legacy, any successes that we have today, we are literally standing on the shoulders of guys like Gary Peterson, Sam Volpentest, Bob Ferguson, so many leaders before us. Really appreciate that. So thanks, everybody. Thanks for turning it up today. Have a great weekend, and we'll be back soon with Coffee with Karl.